Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our teach-in on California entity options for worker cooperatives specifically. Today's teach-in is funded by the city of Berkeley. So I just want to give a shout out to the city of Berkeley for supporting the growth of worker cooperatives, both in their city and for folks joining from outside of Berkeley for supporting the growth of worker cooperatives across the state. Also wanted to give a shout out and thank all of the worker cooperative allies and advocates and worker members who came out and pushed the city to support the growth of worker cooperatives. Without all of their support and probably some of the folks on today's webinar, we wouldn't be able to have got this funding. So I wanted to do a shout out there. My name is Ricardo Nuñez. I'm the Director of Economic Democracy at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And I'm just going to be providing a short introduction into what legal entities are and the pros and cons of choosing one entity over another for a California-based worker cooperative. Later in today's program, we'll be joined by Kieron Slaughter, Chief Community Development Officer at the City of Berkeley's Office of Economic Development, where they'll be sharing about how Berkeley businesses can access the Berkeley Revolving Loan Fund, particularly in light of the co-op-friendly amendments that went into effect in 2020 and the influx of CARES funded no and low interest loans. So that's pretty exciting. So that's going to be at the tail end of the entity formation discussion. So a short introduction. What are we going to be covering today when it comes to legal entities? So first, we're going to talk about what are legal entities. We'll also talk about what factors you should consider when choosing an entity for a worker-owned cooperative. We're going to talk a little bit about the steps to forming a legal entity. And we're going to talk about where you can find more resources because there's going to be a lot coming at you. So don't worry. If all of this information feels like some rocks falling on your head, we have resources galore on our website and that we can share in a follow-up email if you RSVP'd on our event page, where we can direct you to how to create your co-op's employee handbook for both LLCs and cooperative corporations, our Think Outside the Box manual, which is a comprehensive guide for entrepreneurs on how to start and operate a worker cooperative from a legal perspective. We also have a legal guide to cooperative conversions, and you'll be able to find all this stuff on cooplaw.org, our online resource library for cooperative law that we are currently building out so that every state can have a page, and where we're starting to collect all of our resources from across our organization, the legal fellows that we have working at SELC, and all of our wonderful volunteers. So cooperatives. Cooperatives can be a lot of things. Folks are here today because they are interested in legal entity options for worker cooperatives. And I want to flag that cooperative can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. And to illustrate here, people touching an elephant, this is supposed to be an elephant, without seeing it. And depending on what part of the elephant that you're focused on, you can conclude different things about what you're touching. So for some, a cooperative is a tax category. So for accountants maybe, or tax professionals, they might look at a cooperative and see, oh, you have to be taxed as a cooperative to be considered a cooperative. To others, a cooperative is a type of corporation. So in California, we have a California Cooperative Corporation. And so some people think to be called a corporation, you have to be formed under that. And to others, regardless of entity or tax status, it's an organization that adheres to a certain principles of democracy, equity, and inclusion. So I just wanted to flag that. And at the Law Center, we're very agnostic at whether one of these things are right or wrong. A lot of times the way that we operate is that we believe cooperatives are a set of principles that any organization, incorporated or not, can abide by. So cooperative law. I'll be going over some of the practical considerations that cooperatives should be considering when trying to navigate how the law, how to interact with the law that wasn't built for us, and how the law that interacts with our projects, the projects that we are trying to breathe life into and create more emancipatory, just futures that we want to be a part of. So when we enter into this discussion, I don't want to forget that fact that the legal system was not made by us or for us. So a lot of the additional challenges that worker cooperatives face on top of other small businesses that are struggling to survive in our economy, because a lot of the law is not made to facilitate a future that is cooperative and based in solidarity. And so the way that we have structured our economy, and that includes at the organizational level of how legal structures facilitate relationships at our workplaces, has chosen winners and losers. And part of our work, both at the Law Center and with our communities, is to advocate for changes that center community voice, power, and control. So before we get into all the different legal entity options, just wanted to note about that based on what I just said, oops, sorry, this poll just got in the way of my notes. Excuse me. Okay. So it's very important that when you're looking for an attorney, that you find an attorney that understands your values and what you're trying to accomplish. And so for me, sometimes I think of an attorney sort of like a therapist or a counselor. They should be asking questions to get you to surface what's important to you, trying to understand what some of the factors that will impact how you navigate, in this case, the law. They should help you articulate what it is that you want, and helping you put those things into usable tools that you and your cooperative can understand and use moving forward. And they can put all this down in writing so you can understand the rules that you're setting out for yourself within the structural rules that the law allows. And so I'm just saying all of this because when you're looking for an attorney, you might be thinking that they have all the answers, but they just have a lot of information and opinions, and all of the decisions are going to be yours. And so you really need to know that when you start working with an attorney, that all of these decisions are yours to live with. And you don't want to have to go back to an attorney every time there's an issue at your cooperative. And nothing is forever. Your cooperative might look different now than it does in 5 or 10 years. Hopefully that's the case. And your needs are going to change. And so as you're starting to figure out what legal entity options and other issues related to your legal issues related to your cooperative, it's good to shop around, look for relevant experience, be as specific as possible when you're working with your attorney. And to that end, we have a resource on our website called, in our Think Outside the Box manual, called 28 Questions to Consider Before Meeting a Lawyer, so that you and your cooperative members can start to ask yourself these questions, and you won't have to pay somebody to ask those questions to you. And you can save time and money for your cooperative. And don't expect yes or no answers from attorneys. They're probably going to say whatever question you ask, it depends. So just be ready for that and be open to being creative and figuring out how to navigate the law in a way that you feel comfortable with. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Lawyers can talk in legalese, which is unnecessarily complicated and not really friendly for you and non-legal folks. So don't be afraid to ask your lawyer to explain unfamiliar terms or concepts. Helping you navigate the law is literally what you're hiring them to do. So just want to say that. So legal entities. What are legal entities and why do we form them? What is limited liability? Is something we're going to cover. And what are some common types of legal entities for California worker cooperatives? Just want to know that I might be like flying through some of these issues, some really meaty topics. And it is because we have a lot to cover. And I just want to start to frame the conversation for you so that you can understand what questions to ask yourself so that you can start working on this in an informed way and then have those deeper dive discussions either at after this or with an attorney at maybe one of our legal cafes, which I can talk more about later. So what is a legal entity? A legal entity is the legal structures and rules under which a business operates. So examples are general stock corporations, worker cooperative corporation, limited liability company. Not going to talk about nonprofit mutual benefit corporations or B Corps or California benefit corporations. Not going to talk about flexible purpose corporations. And the reason that is because most of the clients that we work with will generally either use a cooperative corporation or an LLC. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Because sometimes not sometimes, a lot of times, this is an example of what clients will come and say to us. You know, we were looking to we want to form a cooperative, but then someone said we should be a B Corp. Then another person said we should be a C Corp. But we kind of want to keep it simple and do an LLC. Oh, and someone said to incorporate in Delaware, because apparently Delaware is where important people incorporate things. So when clients say things like this, it's hard to untangle all of these things. And it complicates discussions about choosing the appropriate entity because people confuse legal entities with tax statuses. And what was it? And they also complicate it because they're talking about things that should maybe go into an internal policies document to the cooperative as opposed to in your bylaws or operating agreement. So it gets really confusing. So because it can get so confusing, let's look at something a little less confusing and more enjoyable. Cake. So think of cake as the entity and think of the icing as the tax status. An entity is something that you form according to state statutes, and the tax category is the variety of icing you elect at the federal level, usually to achieve some particular tax benefit. You can really mix and match cake and icing. So when you start to understand that, there's an infinite possibility for the ingredients you choose for your internal financial, governance, operational structures. And that's really the stuff that shows up in your policies and practices as opposed to your bylaws or operating agreement, although it can show up there too. And those financial and governance and operational ingredients is really what gives the co-op a lot of its flavor. So if we let clients believe that there are just 4 different options, let's say, then it's like we're serving them up a smashed up piece of cake. So many times we've watched lawyers confuse their clients by trying to explain entity structure in a way that conflates the choice of entity with tax status and other considerations like governance. So I'm mostly going to be discussing the entity part, the cake part today, and we'll be leaving most of the talk about taxes to another time. So let's start with the basics of entities. If I start selling goods or services, like take a client and charge them money, then I will instantly become a sole proprietor. Poof, magic. You're an entity. And you don't even have to lift a finger to form this type of entity. It is automatic. Once you start operating like a business, the state of California is going to look at your activities and they're going to say, you're a sole proprietor. Now what happens if a friend and I start practicing law together? Even if we don't lift a finger to form an entity, we will have formed by operation of law a partnership. If you do this, however, you're going to want to formalize your partnership a little bit. A partnership agreement is a really great tool to make sure you and your partner are on the same page about how you work together, make decisions, allocate profits, etc. You also need to get a separate tax ID for your partnership, file a tax return for it. And you have the option to register your partnership with your state, which is helpful for purposes like proving to a bank that you really have formed a partnership. And so those are the defaults. If you start operating without doing anything to form a legal entity, you're going to be a sole proprietor, or if you're by yourself, or a partnership if you're working with somebody else. So some things to think about if you're going to just start doing that. Liability. So liability is unlimited, which means that whatever you're doing for your business, if you or your partner do something that hurts somebody else in some way, they can sue you and come after your personal assets. Another thing to think about is tax treatment. So if you don't form a legal entity at the state level and you create one of these and it's just like poof magic, you avoid an $800 minimum franchise tax, which you owe to the state every year. Also, just tax treatment, you're taxed as a partnership. And then the last is that maybe you don't have time right at the beginning when you're starting your business to create and fill out all of the organizational documents and go through the formalities of forming a legal entity. So that's just something to consider as well. So maybe right now, a few of you are wondering, how do you protect your assets? So understanding liability. This is really about assessing risk. So liability issues. Think about all the activities that your business will engage in and the risks these activities may create. Will you be serving food, like the Taharka food truck based in Baltimore, a worker cooperative that serves ice cream? Will you have people coming into your store, like the folks at Mandela Cooperative in West Oakland? Will you have employees? Will you be carrying out work on someone else's property? Will you and your coworkers be driving? Or will you mostly be sitting in front of your computer all day until your eyeballs fall out? So like folks at Design Action Collective, maybe their eyeballs don't fall out. But they're a great graphic design worker cooperative in downtown Oakland. And they're mostly working on their computers. So all these different types of risks, the more risk there is, the more liability there is. So some folks want to limit their liability. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that your enterprise is protected from getting sued. It means that you have, and you should get insurance, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But this is really why people start to think of, or one of the reasons why people may think about forming a legal entity, is to add an extra layer of liability, because entities create a liability shield. They're basically drawing a line between the assets of, corporations and any kind of company or partnership with LL, so like a limited liability company, offer a liability shield of sorts. So here's how it works. It means that if your business borrows money and cannot pay it back, an individual worker owner of your business will, in theory, not be liable to repay that debt personally. If the business causes harm through negligence or recklessness, individual worker owners will, in theory, be protected from liability. The idea is that the business and its worker owners are two separate things. And you, as a worker owner of the business, can step back and say, look, it's not me who caused that damage. It's my company. My company is separate from me, like this dog. And there are a lot of formalities that companies are advised to adhere to in order to demonstrate that you do view the company as separate. So like keeping a separate bank account, not intermingling personal funds with business funds, keeping minutes at your meetings, and recording your board votes, for example, or your member votes, are all ways that you are distinguishing and keeping a record that, in fact, there is a separate entity, separate from your personal human beingness. But none of this is a complete liability shield, and here's why. Even if you maintain the appropriate level of separation between yourself and your business, you could still be personally liable for the debts of your company because, especially if you're just starting out, and especially if it's just one or two people, it's not going to be very easy to borrow money unless you each sign what's called a personal guarantee of the loan. So putting up your personal assets to be able to access this business capital. Furthermore, if you are personally negligent in some way, you may not necessarily be personally shielded. Other individual members of your business will be shielded though. but possibly not you if it's you doing something that could be construed as not being within the business activities of your business. So sometimes we've told people that the limited liability piece is overrated if you are in a relatively low risk industry and you have really good insurance. If you work with other people, the liability shield could help you sleep at night because maybe you're worried that your business partner might screw things up for you. And a note on the personal guarantee, the Berkeley Revolving Loan Fund has done great work on transforming the personal guarantee with worker cooperatives. And we can talk about that more later. So whether you have a limited liability entity, you should still get insurance. That's because while the entity protects your personal assets, it will still cost you money to defend yourself or your business if you get sued. So a good insurance policy will cover those legal expenses. The main type of insurance you should consider getting is general liability insurance, which covers bodily injuries, property damage, other losses that could occur as a result of the operation of your business. You should also probably carry workers' compensation insurance if you have employees, product liability insurance, and commercial automobile insurance if you're a business that uses vehicles. Some other considerations while you're trying to figure out should you form a legal entity or not is cost. So in California, forming a limited liability entity like a corporation or an LLC means you're going to have to pay $800 per year in minimum taxes. I know a lot of businesses that form corporations really early on and later regret it because $800 is a lot of money for someone just starting out their business. Also, there's some formalities to weigh in your considerations. Corporations come with a lot of formalities, including holding meetings, providing people with notice of those meetings, taking minutes, keeping clear records. So those are some things that maybe you're ready to do, but some cooperatives maybe aren't. Another consideration is whether you want to deal with the administrative requirements of being an employee of your own entity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but if you form a corporation, you may legally be its employee, even if it's just you. Do you want your company to issue wage statements and remit payroll taxes if it's just you? Those are the kind of formalities that can just add to the overall administrative burden of starting a business. And just to complicate things, when we're talking about employment questions, there are different legal tests for who is an employee when it comes to taxes versus when it comes to immigration law and versus when it comes to employment law. All of those areas of law are separate and they've each created their own test for what it means to be an employee. So that's why when we talk with entrepreneurs, we really advise them to talk to an employment law attorney when they're trying to figure out how to navigate whether or not they should consider themselves employees. So forming an entity is generally something you do by filing papers with the Secretary of State. And so that's at the state level is forming the entity, or you can register it if you want a partnership. And then the icing is choosing that tax status, which we're not going to really get into today, but we'd be happy to talk to you about at a legal cafe. And that's just choosing how you're going to want Uncle or Auntie Sam in this case to collect taxes from your cooperative. So I'm going to get more into the nitty gritty of limited liability companies and general stock corporations and cooperative corporations. So limited liability companies. The operating agreement is the contract that is signed by all the members of the cooperative to define how they're going to operate their business. In an LLC, there's fewer formalities and simpler documents than a corporation. And you can incorporate a one member, one vote principle, but it's not required by law. So future members of an LLC cooperative could change the cooperative nature of the business. Another thing is a consideration to take account of is you likely don't need to treat yourself and other worker owners like employees. You could all be managing members of your LLC. And so when this comes to workers' compensation or other areas of law, can actually save the cooperative a lot of money. Many organizations operate like cooperatives, but for a variety of reasons, they'll choose another entity other than a cooperative corporation. So in our work at the Law Center, we found that many businesses are looking to put in some lean years to get the business off the ground where profits might not exist and can't fiscally meet the requirements of employment law, say, for example. And so they'll choose an LLC. Here's an example of one of our, the first page of an operating agreement for an LLC cooperative that we worked with. And so you can find this resource on our website, and it's a template for how to operate an LLC cooperative using cartoons. Also, because a lot of folks come to us and they're talking with undocumented folks, their questions revolve around what are the immigration laws and worker cooperatives and LLCs and how do they all interact. Under the Immigration Reform and Control Act, a business may not knowingly hire undocumented workers. And for all employees, you have to collect an I-9, which is a form that verifies their ability to work in the United States. But an LLC worker cooperative can avoid being an employee because they're all self-employed business owners and they form that operating agreement contract where they're all partners self-employing themselves. And so no I-9 is required, and the co-op can knowingly include undocumented members. So this is a way that if we're working with marginalized communities, or you want to make sure that your cooperative is open to folks from all different backgrounds, then LLC might be an option for you to look at. But it's not just you saying on paper that you're not employees. The real test is how you are all treating each other on a day-to-day basis and recording how you're going to treat each other also on paper. So you have both of those things line up. And so when we're talking with LLCs who don't want to create an employment relationship for their cooperative for whatever reason, we say that every member has to be an owner. And so there's a little box that says member managed LLC when you incorporate, that there should be no hierarchy or as little hierarchy as possible in your cooperative, that members can influence hiring, firing, strategy, and other major decisions. You avoid direct supervision. So the way that we advise a lot of folks to do that is to have rotating support systems. So no one person is acting like a supervisor, but everyone is actually cooperatively working together. Members share in profits and losses. And also another thing is avoid growing really large. So the smaller the worker cooperative is, the easier it's going to be to tell a court in some bad case scenario that you all actually are sharing real power and responsibility together. And so one last thing about LLCs, member managed LLCs, is that each member is taxed on a share of the entity's profits like a partnership. So you're going to be receiving a K-1 instead of a W-2. Some people aren't used to receiving K-1s for their taxes, so it can be a little confusing. Workers' compensation insurance is not required for members, so you can opt out. There's an exemption for member-managed LLCs for the members to exempt themselves from workers' compensation, which can be a lot of money. And we tell people to keep the operating agreement, the operating agreement can be simple, but it should reflect cooperative practices and management of all members, so that one person, one vote, profits are shared on the basis of work, equal participation in governance and management, and that non-hierarchical distribution of responsibilities. So that's LLCs. Now we're going to talk about corporations. So corporations, it varies from state to state. This is something that I didn't know when I started doing this work, is that legal entities are governed by the state and not the federal government. So if you want to start and operate a business in California, California has different legal entities than, say, Arizona or Colorado or New York. And so the most common types of corporations that we see folks forming in California are general corporations or stock corporations, benefit corporations, nonprofit mutual benefit corporations, nonprofit public benefit corporations, and cooperative corporations. Today, I'm just going to be talking about general stock corporation to give you a sense of that, one of the most commonly used corporations. We're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about cooperative corporations. So general stock corporation is the most common. Because it's a corporation, a general stock corporation, it's owned by shareholders. The purpose of a corporation, the legal purpose of almost every corporation, is profit-driven, to maximize shareholder benefit. Shares of stock are usually exchanged for capital contributions, and voting power is directly related to the number of shares that somebody buys. And there's double taxation. So when you're bringing in money to your business, there's a tax at the entity level of the corporation and the individual level when you receive, let's say, a profit dividend from your business. So corporations and cooperatives. Sometimes people will use a general stock corporation when they want to form a cooperative, but a lot of times, and I'll get more into this in a second, a lot of people just form cooperative corporations. But before more people were using cooperative corporations, they were taking that general stock corporation and then incorporating cooperative principles into it. Another thing to note about corporations is that corporations are legal persons. And so workers are presumed to be employees under employment law. So it's really difficult to tell a court that even if you're all working cooperatively and there's no hierarchy, that you are not an employee. It's very difficult to pass that test. And so that's something just to note. Members of a corporation, if you want to form a cooperative corporation, members are shareholders, and workers' compensation insurance is more likely, and there's more corporate formalities. So those are some of the things to be thinking about when you're forming a corporation. So what are some benefits of forming a California cooperative corporation? So we do have a specific corporation in California called the California Cooperative Corporation. And I'm going to give you some reasons why, or some benefits about why you could choose this form, this legal entity. So you can put cooperative in your name. A lot of people are gravitating toward cooperatives these days. If you want to engage the community and foster a broad sense of ownership, being a cooperative and calling yourself a cooperative might help with that. If you call your project a cooperative, it can foster a sense of belonging in ways that other kinds of businesses and organizations can't. And so in California, you legally cannot call yourself a cooperative or have it in your business name unless you are legally established as a cooperative corporation. Another benefit of a cooperative corporation is that it has built-in democratic structures. So there's already the one member, one vote principle that is legally required in a cooperative corporation. Another is that there's already built-in non-extractive finances into that legal entity. So in California, there's a 15% cap on annual returns of capital investment. So people who are investing in your cooperative can only receive a maximum of 15% return, annual return on that capital investment. And profits, or what we call under the tax code for cooperatives, surplus, should be used to benefit its members and given back to its members based on the value that they contributed over the year. And a lot of times the way that worker cooperatives will define or calculate that benefit, that return to the worker members, is the number of hours that they worked. But you can use it different ways and different things to calculate that formula. Another benefit of California cooperative corporations is that there's a securities exemption for member shares up to $1,000 per person. I'm not going to talk about securities law, but it is really complicated, and it can get you into a lot of trouble when you're offering folks to, or asking folks to invest in your business. So I'm just going to say that a big benefit of the California Cooperative Corporation is that you're able to get members to invest up to $1,000, and you don't need to do any registration at the state or federal level to do that. So you can raise equity and leverage other capital. Usually when folks are trying to go out and get loans from a bank or a financial institution, the organization generally needs equity. The cooperative usually needs equity on the books. And so one great thing about cooperatives is that all of that member investment can be equity on your books. You can leverage that to get other types of capital that you'll need to run your business. Now in 2016, 2015 and the years leading up to it, there was a coalition of organizations that did a lot of work to pass a law called AB 816, the California Worker Cooperative Act, which provided a legal framework for worker cooperatives and a pathway for worker cooperatives to raise capital from their community. And so another benefit, if you wanted to elect to be a worker cooperative corporation in California, is that you can actually raise capital from investor members, otherwise known as the general public. So you can have a worker member class, and you can have an investor member class for your cooperative. And those investor members and their legal rights of control over the cooperative are very limited. And so like things around buying property, merging with another business, or selling the cooperative, those are some of the, there's very few things that those investor members can actually vote on. And all the rest of the decision-making is left to the worker members of the cooperative. Another great thing about this law that was passed in 2015 and went into effect in 2016 was that defined what worker cooperatives are, and that it requires 51% of all the workers to be either members or candidates on their pathway to becoming a worker member in a cooperative. And another thing that it did was it reduced some of those corporate formalities for collective board worker cooperatives, where all the worker members are on the board of the cooperative. Another good thing about forming a cooperative corporation in California is that it's a lot easier to get this tax status called Subchapter T, which is pretty great. And what that allows you to do is to not be double taxed at the corporate level. So your company and your members, your worker members, you hopefully can receive more of that income, and it won't be taxed twice. It'll only be taxed once when you receive it as a patronage dividend at the end of the year. And then finally, my final point on benefits of cooperative corporations is that cooperatives can generally engage in any lawful activity or business. So a lot of people come to us to talk about starting up a cooperative when, after hearing about the activities that they want to do and the way that they want to get funding, it makes more sense for them to be a nonprofit instead, or maybe to create two different organizations, one nonprofit and one cooperative that are connected in some way. So by contrast to the cooperative corporation, 501c3s are mostly limited to activities that advance charitable, educational, or scientific and religious purposes. And so maybe that's too constraining for your group. So an activity that looks like it's a commercial business or that primarily benefits a limited group of people could fall outside of that 501c3 category. And you might want to do a cooperative corporation for that. But anyway, we just get a lot of people who are really interested in doing social good. And sometimes it makes more sense for them to be a nonprofit, but that limits your activities, as opposed to a cooperative corporation where you can engage in any lawful activity, including policy advocacy, if you wanted to do that. So the last point I'll just come to is when you're talking to an attorney, these are some points that you would want to bring in an attorney for your cooperative. There's a lot of resources that we've created on our website. There's spaces that we create, like our Resilient Communities Legal Cafe and spaces like today, for folks to come and have discussions about their cooperative ideas and how to navigate the law. But when you're working with your worker members or entrepreneurs or group of folks. These are some points that we recommend that you bring in an attorney to really give you some advice once you've done some of that homework yourself. When you're choosing an entity, when you're drafting or amending your bylaws, your operating agreement, when there's employment law matters, is an area that you want to talk to an attorney. When you're negotiating key contracts, when you're bringing in new partnerships or stakeholders. A lot of cooperatives want to have outside stakeholders maybe sit on the board. And so that's a good time to talk to an attorney about how to set that up. Like I said, seeking loans or investments, it gets really complicated with the law. So that's the time when you want to talk to an attorney. When a member leaves, especially when they leave under difficult circumstances, is a time that you'd want to talk to an attorney. And when you want to sell, terminate, or expand your cooperative. So these are all like key moments in your cooperative's life cycle that you'd probably want to talk to an attorney. So that's my short introduction into legal entities and when to bring in an attorney to support you with that. And right now, I'll pass it over to Kieron to talk a little bit about how Berkeley businesses can access the Berkeley Revolving Loan Fund. And so Kieron, love to hear your,
yeah. Well, thank you, Ricardo. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the introduction. And I was going to give at least a 5-second break to Mr. Merriman Roberts, who is doing a fantastic job signing. So I just want to take a deep breath, allow him to rest his hands for a minute.
I'm fine. You can go on.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. So I'm Kieron Slaughter, Chief Community Development Officer for the City of Berkeley, Office of Economic Development, and just want to give a brief summary of what we're doing in Berkeley to support worker-owned cooperatives because they're vital to Berkeley's local economy. And I know I'm speaking and preaching to the choir, but this may be viewed by people who don't know that much about worker-owned cooperatives. So I just want to make sure that we're on the record. It's saying that, you know, these businesses that are owned and run by employees often provide higher wages, benefits, professional development, job security, upward mobility for low and moderate income people. And just as importantly, these small businesses provide a diversity of locally owned services that become valuable community assets. And in Berkeley, there's a number of worker-owned cooperatives that have become part of the community fabric, like the Cheese Board Collective, Biofuel Oasis, Missing Link Bicycle Cooperative. Those are the ones that usually get a lot of attention, but we know there's more, and we know that people are considering it and thinking about it, which is why we were so excited to partner with Project Equity and Selk to support these conversions. And so, we know that these cooperatives are at a disadvantage to conventional hierarchical business ownership models because it's difficult to get startup capital. Equity investors and banks are usually unfamiliar with cooperatives and kind of, all the stuff that Ricardo went over. And we've heard that, this is one of the main barriers to business ownership for people of color is to access to startup capital. And so that's why, way back in 1980, the city received a grant from the Economic Development Administration for $500,000 to initiate our revolving loan fund. We call it the RLF. A lot of people and entrepreneurs just aren't even familiar with this and don't know that many cities actually have loans. We've got, we're here, we're available, and we offer low interest rates and flexibility. And just most people don't think of a city as the first place to stop for funding. But we also know that there were some challenges. But the goal of our program is the creation and assistance to women and minority-owned businesses. It's how it's framed in the authorizing document, the enabling legislation. We use different terms now, but business and nonprofit organizations located in Berkeley are eligible for these loans, but it wasn't as easy as it could have been to allow them to participate in this program. And so, initially this revolving loan fund was just focused on South Berkeley, where a lot of displacement had taken place and gentrification way back then when BART had come through and sort of ravaged the traditional hub of Black-owned enterprise and Black-owned businesses in Berkeley. But over time, we realized that small catchment area was too small. And so we expanded it, and we expanded again to the whole city. And now we're still realizing that we were looking at things too narrowly, and which is why like I said, through the partnership with Selk and Project Equity, we worked collaboratively to introduce some new legislation that makes it easier for worker-owned cooperatives. Now, they're not major groundbreaking stuff, but it's stuff that literally with a couple edits in our administrative plan just makes it that much easier. And so on February 26, in 2019, that's when our city council adopted these recommendations. And it was based on significant input. We have a loan administration board, which is an appointed board that reviews all of our loans applications, as well as our guiding document. And so they're the ones that have to make a recommendation to make these changes, and they did. And so I'll just go over briefly what these changes were. Basically, number one was to enable the use of loan capital for conversion to worker-owned cooperatives, because that, businesses, the risk of closure, because maybe an owner's retiring. We've heard the silver tsunami. They may put the business on the market, but now they'll be able to use these funds to help workers actually acquire and democratically own the business and keep it rooted in Berkeley. Once again, retaining jobs and creating jobs. And so, that's number one. Number two, clarify and limit the personal guarantee requirement for cooperatives. Cooperatives will be able to select an ownership panel to provide the personal guarantee to access our funds. And it'll allow a group of principals to basically put up 10% of the equity for an existing cooperative business that looks to convert, or 20% for a startup. So we think this will allow more cooperatives to be eligible for our revolving loan fund. Because, you may have a couple folks that have some challenging credit history, or, nobody wants to take on all that risk by themselves. And so this reduces the risk for each one. And then if somebody were to leave, like Ricardo said, hopefully on good terms, they won't, we don't have to rip up the contract and start from scratch. We can substitute one panel member in for another one. So we think this also reduces the risk and allows some flexibility that usually contracts don't provide. Number three, we're including the creation of retention of worker-owned jobs as a selection criteria. Like I said, our program is pretty basic. It's either you can prove that you'll retain a job or create a job. And now we can say you can prove that you're creating a worker-owned job or retaining a worker-owned job. So that gives folks in this space another opportunity. And then lastly, it's adding a goal to our plan to allocate a minimum of 10% of our portfolio to worker-owned cooperatives and folks in the business of converting to democratic worker ownership. And so this basically shows the city's support. It shows that the loan administration board, supports this, and it gives us a goal so that when I do outreach, when I go out, I can actually do targeted outreach with intention. And so we think these changes make the RLF more accessible to worker-owned cooperatives, and makes actually the city of Berkeley one of the first cities in the country to offer loan funding tailored to the needs of cooperatives. And we also believe that these actions are scalable, and these can be a model for other cities locally, which is part of the reason we're participating and helping support this type of teach-in, because this was new to me as well a few years ago. And so I'm still learning about it. And I'm just happy that, we're able to work with two organizations that are very organized and very intentional about what they want to do. And it has resulted in the changes that you see in our administrative plan. And so this is where we are now. We're proud of where we are. And once again, I want to use this as an opportunity to be a model for other cities and other locations and jurisdictions, and just to spread the word. And, we had a similar event like this, a similar webinar for staff, because we thought it was important to teach our own staff internally about everything we're learning today. So the learning curve is steep for some. People have been usually focused on, S corps or LLCs or all the things you mentioned, and they hear work on cooperatives. They say, wait, hold on now, hold on. And so this allows them to, instead of leaning back, they can lean in and say, wait a minute, I've heard about that. That sounds good. I've heard that, all the pros and all the benefits, and we're excited to be a partner. And so thanks for this opportunity to share what we're doing in the city of Berkeley. And I look forward to continued partnership.
Awesome. Thank you, Kieron. Really appreciate it. Kieron's going to stick around. I'm just going to share some resources really quick, and then we'll go to some Q&A. So resources, the city of Berkeley, like Kieron just said, is a great resource. Another resource is coop-law.org, where you'll find all those manuals that I was talking about, including, I think, Outside the Boss manual. We have our Resilient Communities Legal Cafe, where we do 3 times per month drop-in legal advice session for folks around California. And we started opening it up to folks around the country as well. Project Equity is another great resource, and we'll be joined by them in a second. Miyaka can share more about Project Equity. Democracy at Work Institute is a national think and do tank for the worker cooperative movement. They're the sister organization of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, which is the National Business Association of Worker Cooperatives. The California Center for Cooperative Development is also another great resource. They're based out of Davis, but they work across California to support all different types of cooperatives, including housing, consumer and worker, and agriculture, and electric. The U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives is another great resource and a way to connect with other worker cooperatives across the country, particularly if you're in an industry that maybe in California, we don't have a worker cooperative around, or maybe 1 or 2, so that you can share and ask questions around your industry and how to navigate being a business, a worker cooperative business in your industry.